Hello, guys, and welcome to my Los Angeles Chargers 7 round mock draft. This is one of two final mock 7 rounders that I'm going to be doing. As you can see, obviously, with up here, with Green Bay Packers, we're going to be doing that next, and that will have been every single team's 7 round mock draft that I have done. And later this week, on probably Friday, a usual upload day, except for we've been doing obviously a slew of these many days in a row. I'm gonna do like my top, 10 at every position, maybe 15, 20. I'm just gonna kind of, play it by ear, who I think is, really good in terms of like skill group positions, wide receivers, running backs, and, tight ends, more than likely for the offense. And then next week I'll jump into and maybe include like their best fits in my opinion, for teams that they're in. But otherwise, next week, obviously we're inching very, very, very close to the draft. We've only got, a little bit under 2 weeks until the draft, or a few weeks until the draft on the 24th. Obviously, yeah, 2 weeks, pretty much. But yeah, we're gonna look at the Chargers, depth chart here real quick. I do like the signings they made. I think they made very effective signings of pieces that they wanted. Mike Williams, we'll start from the top and go down. Familiar with this team, not with this system. He obviously wasn't with them when Harbaugh joined last year, but is familiar with Justin Herbert and most of the rest of the offense. Looking at the next signing, Mekhi Becton, I think this was brilliant. I think that they bring Mekhi Becton in and it helps their run game. Not to say that they didn't have like a decent run game last year, but I think that they could have done better. And obviously, looking at the running back room, they obviously kind of moved on from some people, but they signed Najee Harris. And I know I kind of skipped over Tyler Conklin, but I think Conklin was a solid signing. I think on a struggling Jets team, he did some good things last year and, gives you the experience at the position. It still would not surprise me if this team went a high flying tight end, as like a deep threat or as a field stretcher. So it's like the positions of need to me on the offensive side of the ball are, maybe a center if they don't believe in Bozeman. I don't think he was bad. Obviously they signed a guy from Las Vegas as a depth piece. A wide receiver, obviously, I think they could use another young piece. Obviously Quinn Johnston is young, but he just was inconsistent. And if he doesn't get any better, you don't want to have to just rely on Ladd McConkey, who's obviously a bona fide beast. And teams are going to be teeing up on him next season after he was clearly the best wide receiver last year on this team. And they don't really have good depth. Rager, who's bounced around, as we know, since he was drafted before Justin Jefferson. Brendan Rice, I don't even know. Darius Davis, I don't know, or any of these guys, to really be honest with you. But it's like you look at their offense overall, they really addressed, what they needed. A workhorse back that under Harbaugh, I think Najee Harris is going to be able to, show that he's one of the top backs in the league potentially, or at least, a great talent, in terms of like what he can do, and that, I mean, you're not going to be able to tee up against the run against a guy like Herbert. And it's going to be, really fun to watch the Chargers next year. I think this is a team that could legitimately take over this division if they draft right and they have a little bit more balance. Even though I think that with their talent and with their defense, it's really good. Looking at the defense, obviously we know Deshaun Hand, a big run stuffer. Tyir Tart, big nose tackle. Otito Ogbanya, not gonna lie, I don't really know who he is, I guess. But defensive interior is kind of something that I think that they'll look at in this draft. Not that these guys aren't bad or anything like that. And then you look at the pass rush, you got Tuli Tuapolatu and then Khalil Mack, who they re-signed, obviously. So Khalil Mack still playing very, very well. They do have good depth. I've always liked Bud Dupree, a very big physical guy who's a good depth piece rusher type of thing. I could see them potentially going a pass rusher here just to have a little bit more youth. And they also, Khalil Mack, I think, said he might only play one more year or something like that. And whenever you have a situation like that, you don't want to be dead in the water with no experienced pass rush that's going to give you consistent play at the very least. Looking at their inside linebackers, we have Denzel Perryman, good veteran piece, and Diane Henley, who I'm not going to lie, I don't really know who this is. So inside linebacker, I think is something they could definitely go. And there's some of those in this draft for sure at, various stages, this being a deep draft for a lot of positions. Looking at their safeties, obviously you have Derwin James, star, who, plays very, very well, very gritty. And then Alohi Gilman, who obviously was a 6th-round pick, but I honestly think that you could go and you could maybe look at a safety, here. And then looking at the corners, you got Dante Jackson, a good guy who played for Pittsburgh, and just about anybody, that comes out of Pittsburgh is going to play a gritty, tough game, which I think, I wouldn't say they play the same brand on the Chargers, but very, very good. And then, Cam Hart, and then Tarheeb Still doesn't stand still, you guys. But I think that corner is definitely something that they could do. Obviously, St. Juste comes from Washington. I think he is a good depth piece, a good young depth piece. And, but I think that they could go corner, inside linebacker, and defensive interior and pass rush are kind of the 4 positions of need. And then on the offense, it's like, I feel like they could go with a wide receiver and a tight end. And that would be kind of my draft selection. Now we are going to go and actually see how many picks they have. They have a good number of picks, a lot of draft capital. I feel like they're a team that they could move up or even trade back and really load up, even though I don't think that's what they should do. I think they should try to get some of the perennial talent. And, we're going to start this thing. So coming up right here, we obviously have, a couple of tackles, going up here. Michael Williams, a wide receiver, Golden, Green, Ezraku. And looking at this, it's, and looking at who's available, I honestly think it's like you could go and you could grab James Pierce. I think that would be a huge kind of boon to this team. You do have Malachi Starks available. And while it doesn't say that, safety is a position of need, it's kind of one of those things that, to me, you kind of look here and you're like, this guy is a number 9 ranked player type of thing. And we have so many picks. We're going to be able to address needs. And I think that you pair Malachi Starks back there with Derwin James, and you instantly have a crazy safety tandem of guys that can do everything. And it's like, could be a freakish kind of defense. And I mean, they were obviously really good last year. So it's like, if you're looking at wide receivers, yeah, you could go Luther Burden here. I think that he would be, potentially a really good player. You do have Jalen Walker here, who it's like, I really like, has been rising up boards and that sort of thing, and I think that, potentially you could go him here. You have some other players here that it's like, if you wanted to trade back type of thing, perhaps you could do that. But, you never know what's going to happen on draft night. And I feel like, Starks would be a good player, but I am kind of looking for Jalen Walker here, who, they obviously say here with the first look and his size could be, a freakish edge threat as well as an off-ball linebacker. So obviously he's lacking consistency there, but it's like, he obviously a very young age and very good potential. Yeah, put on a little bit more size and he could be really good. I'm kind of I'm honestly kind of like battling between myself. I'm like, do we take Starks or do we take Walker? You know, you even look at some of these other guys. I could see this team drafting Colston Loveland or even trading back maybe a few picks. It's like if you know, what's a team that would maybe not take Loveland, you know, that needs a tight end? Packers don't need it. Vikings probably not. You know, you could maybe trade back, you know, to 27 and still get him type of thing. But it's, you know, it's kind of one of these interesting things that it's like I'm looking at this and it's interesting. I am going to take Starks though. I just think that you can't pass on a talent like this and really throw them for a loop. And then, wow, this is really, really, really a shocker to me. Jaden Higgins falling to 55. I feel like this would be a dream scenario. I wanted to even bring him up that, like, if they're feeling really bold, give Herbert Higgins at, you know, 22, right? 22. It'd be crazy, but it's like we go and we grab Higgins right here, their top need, apparently. And we've just addressed, you know, a guy who can be freakish for your team and I mean make your defense that much more unpredictable, which is always good. And then a guy who can change your team, you know, type of thing. And it's like you never know with Mike Williams and his injury, you never know, you know, whether Quinn Johnston is gonna like regress from inconsistent or just gonna be the same inconsistent thing. But Higgins could easily come in and be part of their, you know, be part of their top two, him and McConkey, and then, you know, Williams or, you know, Quinn. But, you know, overall, that's kind of crazy to me that he fell down there. Now, I am kind of sad because Chris Paul Jr. went just before this pick. He is definitely somebody that I would draft to this team. But like I said before, there is a lot of you know, depth in this draft. So it's like linebacker saying I'm not too worried about. I think we can get one that I like later. You know, looking here, we do have Jeffrey Bassa, whom I like. You know, perhaps you go for a true deep threat in Tesla, but he may fall to 125 type of thing. And I'm kind of looking at, you know, this, and I'm trying to think who is a player that, you know, we could grab here. We have Mello Dotson and Kobe Bryant. You know, it's a little bit of a reach type of thing. I'm going to look at Mello Dotson here real quick, though. And it's like, you know, completion percentage isn't crazy. And he's never, besides his first year, where clearly, I mean, maybe scheme or who knows, but it was a you know, low grade and a good passer rating. But, you know, you look at this is a guy who can bring it back. And, you know, a 6'1", 190, a ball hawking type of guy like this, I'm inclined to take him for this, you know, because I think, you know, his man coverage grade is really good, zone coverage a little bit better, and just overall, you know, this guy looks like he's good at his craft in returning balls back, you know, which isn't always the easiest thing to do. So now moving here, we do have Tesla available. You know, rank 111, but to 125, he's kind of dropping down. I think Tesla is a guy with, you know, obviously didn't get a ton of like yards per run, but he's a deep threat kind of guy that, you know, is tall and fast. I mean, you draft 2 6'4" wide receivers, and I feel like people are gonna, you know, be really ecstatic. Has that Randy Moss size at 6'4", 217. Sorry, you guys, I'm remembering my childhood. And, you know, you bring him in and you have a blazer. Now, not like Higgins can't do that, but he's more of just an all-around complete wide receiver. As Tesla, he's just a burner, which, you know, can be useful on your team. Going on to pick 158, this was kind of one of the things that I was hoping for. We look for Kobe Kane. We go to Kobe Kane because he addresses what I think is a need in the linebacker room. You've got a veteran who's good, but he's old. And it's like you've got a guy who's kind of an unknown still. One thing, a couple things we haven't really addressed. We haven't addressed D-line. They don't have edge on here because obviously I think that their pass rush is going to be good, but I am going to say they go Ty Robinson. I think Ty Robinson, an absolute massive unit, freak athleticism, good pass rush win rate, and a good amount of like pressure put on the QB. Not as much sacks as you would probably want, but he clearly, started to get better this final year in 2024. And look at the versatility of where he can line up. Never a bad thing. We're going to draft him. Now moving on, we have pick 199. We still have, 4 picks, available. I'm starting to kind of wonder, if there's any sort of tight ends we could go for. Conyers, I don't mind, but it's kind of one of those things that I'm like, what do we draft here? I do like Miles Frazier, and I think you can always address guard. I think that Mekhi Becton, while he was healthy all last year, he has had injury issues, and I think that Miles Frazier could easily be a backup that, if knock on wood, anything happens, he could potentially come in and play, because I think it's important to have depth in your O-line. One of the most, if not the most important position to have depth in, besides QB, but it's not plausible to have, insane talent back to back on QB normally. But going down to this pick, we have 3 picks left. We could draft, there's a lot of these wide receivers here. I am kind of like, I think we're good on wide receiver. We have Jake Majors here. You know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to bolster our O-line. We don't really have an edge right here, do we? We have Cam Horsley, who, honestly might not be bad, but we did just draft Ty Robinson. We could draft, another corner. I don't think you can ever have enough corners type of thing. But, kind of looking at this, it's like we have 2 more picks remaining. We could draft some late round, pressure machines type of thing. We got a lot of QBs, with question marks, obviously. I am going to go Jake Majors here. I just think it's important to always be ready. And now we have 2 picks left. We're going to have somewhat of the same type of players here, but I am going to go and I'm going to specifically look at edge because I think it is something that they will address in this draft. We're going to kind of go down the list. Fadil Diggs. I have not been drafting a lot of edge rushers late in a lot of my draft picks because these teams that need them, they're always drafting them really, really early. And obviously the Chargers are a team that they don't need an edge rush this year. They need one for future years. And I'm seeing a lot of 15% pass win rate. Solid. Elijah Alston, the lowest so far at 12. Colin Oliver, this looks... he played 2 games last year. I wonder if we have any notes on him. 6'2", 240. He does look more like he is and this pass rush win rate is from last year, where clearly, he played 2 games, had 2 sacks, 2 hits, and 10 hurries. So it's kind of interesting. A guy that suffers, obviously a season-ending injury, depending on what it is. This guy, obviously, we don't have anything on him. He looks intriguing, though. And intriguing when you don't have to start him right away. When he had 80 snaps this last year, and in those 80, he had 2 sacks. It's not bad. And hurries was good. So it's like, that's a good thing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go out on a lark and say that the Oklahoma State Cowboys had themselves a gem who could have maybe boosted his draft stock a lot. If he had played the whole year. Obviously 31%, that seems like a crazy thing to uphold type of thing. But, it's interesting and at the very least intriguing, type of thing. So moving down here, we really don't have any edge rushers right here. Obviously, that last one was a big reach. We only have 4 left, and not gonna lie, I don't think I've ever seen Cal Poly. That's a team where anyone's come out of. We're gonna look at these guys just out of curiosity. We may honestly end up going with, yeah, none of these guys. This guy got a good amount of hurries, which is impressive. He's 6'3", 245, so undersized, like a little undersized as well, type of thing, but he forced pressure. And let's look at these other guys. Win rate not high, got better though this last year. Wow, Brian Ugwu had a good amount of hurries as well. Not around the sack amount you would want with that many hurries, but looks like a physical beast. Let's grab a dude from the Miami Redhawks, and grab him here. And we'll see how we're graded, to be honest with you. RJ Harvey. Apparently they think they need a halfback on this team. I kind of disagree. I mean, I guess they could go one, but this is interesting. They gave us a really bad grade with this one. Obviously, we could have won it later, probably, type of thing. But it's kind of one of those things that to me is potato, and Mello Dotson looks like a guy who could come in and be kind of an interception problem for some teams, which, this defense was solid. You might be able to swing some games that way. Overall draft grade, a B+. I would love it if you guys told me off and said, hey, they don't need a DB. All these guys will work fine and, fulfill the system. If you guys want to tell me that in the comments or whatever. I do think DB is somewhat of a need. We go back and we look at this, and it's like you have, a new face, Dante Jackson, veteran, Cam Hart, young talent that you clearly like. And I like Hart, but it's his second year. You never know about these corners year after year. Teams figure out about corners, they figure out how to target them, and then they expose them. It is, to be honest, I feel like being a lawn mainstay cornerback in this league is probably harder than being a QB almost. A QB has, potential run game to fall back on. What does a DB have to fall back on? Himself. Unless you've got some crazy good safety back there, but then you're being babysat in a way, or you have some crazy good pass rush and you never get it thrown by you or something. But cornerback is hard. I'm definitely, it's tough love. I like Cam Hart. I like what he did last year, especially as a 5th round pick. And that's like Tarheeb Still, also a 5th round pick last year. You never know how it's going to work out. You just don't know, in all fairness. So that's why I drafted a DB. That's my justification for this F grade, because I feel like I've actually never gotten an F grade for anybody. But I want you guys to tell me what you think. And as always, go Pack Go.